and welcome to So What You're Saying Is. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, I do hope that you're bearing up under these incredibly difficult circumstances we're living through. But I'm delighted to say that this week my guest is someone I'm sure you're very familiar with already. Dave Rubin is host of the Rubin Report. It was started in 2015. It's probably the most watched show when it comes to issues of free speech and political philosophy on YouTube. It has 1.2 million subscribers and something like 260 million views. Now, Dave has got a new book out this week. It's just come out. It's called Don't Burn This Book, Thinking for Yourself in an Age of Unreason. Don't burn this book. He's here to talk to me now from Los Angeles. Thank you very much for joining us, Dave.
Peter, it's good to be with you. You know, it's kind of unfortunate that we have to do all these via the pipes these days and Skype and Zoom and the rest of it. I was looking forward to being on tour in Europe and having some London stops and everything else. And hopefully when this all ends, we'll be able to do it. But in the meantime, we're sort of trapped in this digital can that we're stuck in.
How are you handling the lockdown? I mean, we're still pretty much in it here. But how's it working out for you personally?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm here in Los Angeles and we are very much in it. Just last night, I saw that our progressive governor, Gavin Newsom, has now ordered that all of the beaches in California be closed.
Really?
You know, we've had our mayor here, Eric Garcetti, who also is a progressive, talk about snitching on neighbors if you see them doing something that they're not supposed to do relative to the lockdown. So, you know, I would say for me personally, I have a home studio. As you know, this is my garage. I was a little ahead of the game. You know, now when we watch CNN anchors and everybody else broadcasting out of their kitchens, my operation is pretty solid. We had to put a satellite on the roof to make sure our internet's okay. But my team is working really, really hard, and you know, we're just fine at the moment. But that being said, look, there's obviously sickness out there. There's death. The numbers have not been what everyone predicted them to be, which is fantastic. And perhaps that's because we put a lot of these measures in place. But, you know, as we roll into now 7 or 8 weeks with most of America trapped at home, we do have to start talking about opening up. And, you know, in America, we have a slightly different way about doing things than most of the world, because we do have a federalist system here where the states are allowed, not only allowed, the states are supposed to make decisions for themselves. So California and New York, you know, these with huge urban areas, with progressive, mostly lefty governors and mayors, they're going to do things very differently than, say, Texas or Montana, places that have, you know, much more sparse populations. And I'm a little worried about where I am here, because, you know, it seems like we've done a really nice job of quashing this thing, and then yet still we find there doesn't see, you know, they told us May 15th, it'll end in May 15th, but I don't see that happening right now. And I certainly don't see it happening for everybody. I mean, maybe they'll let a few more people out and the rest of it, but we have to start living. And the last thing I'll say on this is, you know, the unfortunate part of this is we're not that good at discussing difficult issues. In many ways, that's what my book is about.
Yeah.
And one of the difficult issues we have to discuss is, you know, as we start opening things up, it may cause a bit of a second wave. It may cause, you know, people of a certain age, usually 80 and above, to be at a higher risk than they are right now when they're locked at home. But at the end of the day, we have to weigh that risk versus freedom, versus liberty, versus our ability to literally walk outside of our homes. That's a very uncomfortable conversation. And just in the last few days, my friend Ben Shapiro got in a lot of trouble for talking about that, because we don't talk about serious issues very well. You know, instead it's like, oh, well, until nobody is going to be at risk, then we should stay at home. And of course, that's not really how a functioning society can operate.
I mean, you mentioned there Ben Shapiro getting into a bit of trouble. I mean, here we have a kind of media narrative. And if you have a dissenting view, and there are people who dissent, and I suppose, well, what would you say that dissenting view is? It is essentially, for many of them, it is this idea that the cure is worse than the illness, in a nutshell. I mean, is that strong in the States? Do you have dissenting voices? I mean, and how prominent are they?
Well, Fortunately, like you guys, we have a strong history of dissenting voices, and for now, we don't quash those voices by the government. Twitter mobs try to quash those voices, and a lot of blue check journalists, and I put air quotes around usually when I say the word journalists, try to quash those voices. But in effect, what Ben said about this is really what I just said. He actually said it on my live stream when we were promoting my book. And, it's funny because so much of my book is about how to stand up to outrage culture. And here Ben comes on and he says, as I said, something that we all know to be true. This is what an actuary does, right? When you're getting insurance, an actuary has to weigh the risks and your age and your behavior and all of these things versus the price that you're going to pay for your policies. We all know this is reality. So I would say we do have we have not only a strong history of dissenting voices, but I do think our dissenting voices are getting a little louder at the moment. What I'm seeing right now in California is a lot of people are saying, it's time, at least you don't have to open everything up tomorrow in the exact same way it used to be.
Right.
But perhaps we could start opening up shopping malls and say that, only half the amount of people that could go in before could go in now, that you have to wear a mask when you're in there. I mean, we have to have a mature conversation about this, and we need dissenting voices to do that. One of the things that I'm worried about is that in general, and why I said in the book, thinking for yourself, is that we seem to have this idea that just because the WHO says something, or just because a governor says something, that automatically is true. And I'm not saying that they're all corrupt. I'm not saying that they're all evil or misguided or any of those things. But just because an authority figure says something doesn't make it true. So we need to fight that out. Let's not forget that, it's only about 6 weeks ago that the WHO was telling us not to wear masks. So these people have made errors, just like you've made errors, just like I've made errors. And we need to strengthen our resolve to really figure out what's going on here.
I mean, you mentioned the WHO, but I think generally speaking, there's been a decline in confidence in our institutions. I'm sure it's the same there, but that includes the media, should I say the mainstream media, which here has seen a plummeting in public trust. Has that been the same really in the States?
Oh yeah. I think you guys are seeing a very similar phenomenon to what we're dealing with here. It's funny because every time someone asks me some version of this question, I think the reason that you're asking is because you probably see me railing against the media often. And as I had to use air quotes when I said journalists before. But what I always qualify that by is that I would prefer that the mainstream media not crumble. I actually am a person that does believe we need institutions. I believe we do need trusted voices. And what I always say every time I hit somebody at the New York Times or CNN, and I try not to go after the people specifically, I try to go after the ideas that they're presenting, or I should say the misinformation that they're presenting. I always qualify it by saying, I wish that you guys weren't this bad. In fact, you don't have to be perfect. Nobody expects perfect. And in many cases, most of us don't expect decent anymore. But just don't be terribly horrible. Don't be blatant liars. Don't put a headline up that I have to read the article to realize that the headline doesn't match the article. Don't ignore a story for weeks because, let's say, it goes against Joe Biden, where we know if it was against Brett Kavanaugh. I mean, that's one of the things we're dealing with right now, sexual assault allegations. When they go against the conservative, we run with them. They're on the cover of everything for weeks. When they go against the Democrat, we hide them. We put them on page 23. We ignore them. And in the book, I lay out 4 types of fake news. And actually, we always think that fake news is just made up stories. But a new pernicious type of fake news is when they just ignore things.
Yes.
So when you ask me about mainstream media, it's like, I don't want all of these things to crumble. I truly mean this. If tomorrow there was a meeting at the New York Times or at CNN and they cleared some of the brush, they said, we're going to remove some of the ideologically driven stuff that we're putting in here. We're going to have more varied voices and the rest of it. I would be thrilled, even if that came at the expense of my career and my voice in the midst of all of this. I truly would. I'll find something else to do. That'll be just fine. But unfortunately, I think this, when these institutions start to crumble, and I think there's a reason for this, once they sort of let social justice in there, which in many ways is anti-human. Social justice, this idea that we should judge each other based on our sexuality or our skin color or our gender. Once you let this into a system, it's very much like a virus. A virus is very easy to catch and very hard to get rid of. And I think we've seen it inject itself in many of our colleges. We've seen it inject itself in many of our journalistic institutions, and that's why they start crumbling. This is, in many ways, it's very sad for me because, my book is a defense of classical liberalism, which especially you guys have a wonderful defense of. I would say in certain ways better than America. But I'm watching right now most liberal institutions crumble while some of the conservative ones seem to be able to stand up to this.
Yes. I think it's absolutely right. I mean, here in Britain, obviously, we have the BBC, which has a legal obligation to be impartial. And very few people now, or at least the people I know, can sort of actually claim that it is impartial. It's almost blatant. With your new book, Dave, I loved it. I mean, I'm about halfway through. It seems to me that it's very much it's a sort of survival manual in some ways, or it's who are you aiming it at?
Well, it's interesting because when I start the book by saying this, but when I got the original deal, when I signed it, it was supposed to be Why I Left the Left. That was going to be the title of the book, and it's a phrase that's been attached to me because I did a PragerU video that I think has around 20 million views where I talked about leaving the left, even though within the video itself I had never said I left the left. And I really, at that time, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, I really felt I was trying to fix the left from the inside. I was trying to say to my liberal friends, hey guys, there's something wrong with us. We're not defending free speech anymore. Right. We're not defending open inquiry anymore. We're silencing dissent. There's something wrong with us on the left. And I started writing that book for about 3 weeks. And then I suddenly realized that I didn't want to write a book about what I was against. I wanted to write a book about what I was for. And this book really, I think what I'm doing is not only laying out my classically liberal positions on things and really the philosophy of classical liberalism, which, by the way, I think most people inherently are classical liberals. They just don't know it. Right. It sounds like something old. You're a classical liberal. It sounds like you're from the 1700s or something like that. And that really is where the roots of classical liberalism started with the Enlightenment. But in effect, classical liberalism believes in two things effectively. You believe in individual rights, meaning if you are a member of any society, if you're a legal member of a society, you have equal rights. That's it. It doesn't matter if you're black or white or gay or straight or what your national origin is or anything else. You have equal rights. Now, that doesn't mean everything in life is going to be equal. It doesn't mean an equality of outcome. And that's where people, at least the modern progressives, seem to get hung up. All it means is that the world is giving you a starting point in terms of laws. Now, you might work harder than somebody else. You might be luckier. You might be born into more money or into less money, or the litany of things that make life life. And then it's kind of on you. But individual rights, I think, are the great leveler in a society. Right. That's the first part. And then the second part, which is very simple, is the light touch of government, that you don't want government doing everything. And in most cases, I think you want to exhaust the private sector until you turn to government. So let's see if, even right now with Corona, like what have we seen happen? Well, we've seen people like Mike Lindell from MyPillow transform his factory to make 50,000 masks a day. We've seen really interesting human ingenuity from the private sector. Now, that's not to say the government doesn't have to do anything. Of course, it has to do certain things. But that you would want to do as much possibly outside of the government. And I think that's really how most of us, if we sat back for a moment and thought about how our lives are and what kind of lives we want to live, I think that's actually the lens that most of us would use to flourish. Yeah. So I would say this book is really for anyone that wants to think a little bit differently than mainstream is pushing them to think. So listen, there are things in this book that are going to piss off everybody. Obviously, mostly people on the right, conservatives and libertarians like me at the moment, but I make a pro-choice argument in this book. That is a major no-no for conservatives. Yeah. Yet I take that position. Obviously, I take plenty of positions that are against, progressive orthodoxy of the day. But the real point of the book, and I say this in here, is I am not telling you what to think. I am really not. I have no doubt, Peter, that if we talk for hours, we could find a whole bunch of stuff we disagree on, right? But in a free society, you should actually relish that you live with people who think differently than you. I don't care what my neighbor thinks specifically about politics, as long as his politics don't suddenly infringe on my property, on my life. If he was doing things politically that were going to take away my rights, we have a problem. If he felt he could just walk onto my property and do whatever he wants, we have a problem. But beyond that, I think most people want to live and let live. And unfortunately, between the media and the political establishment, we've sort of been just tricked into thinking that everyone's business is our business. And I just don't believe that.
But also, isn't it the case, Dave, that, people here, it's the same in America, I'm sure, but they feel a real sort of sense of oppression, that sort of, I'm not allowed to say what I think, that somehow or other there is this orthodoxy now, which is pretty much kind of set up by various parts of the establishment and the various institutions. And if you go against that, then there's hell to pay. So in your book, you are quite specific. You give practical pointers to people, don't you? I know one of them is you say to people who might feel beleaguered, you say, get a mentor, for example. Yeah. Now, can you describe, what that would be? What do you mean by that?
Sure. So this was actually, it's chapter 9 in the book, and it was one of the last chapters that I wrote. You probably know this when you're writing a book. Often, the editors move things around. So I wrote what they told me was a pretty clean copy for the first round. And then one of the few things that the editor had to do was actually move some chapters around. So what now is chapter 1, actually, I think was chapter 4 when we started. Chapter 9 was a little bit earlier. And I mention that because in chapter 9, I talk about how Jordan Peterson became my mentor. And for your audience that doesn't know Jordan, although
they do, because of course you toured with him. You toured for 2 years with him, didn't you?
Yeah, we toured for almost 2 years. We did about 120 stops in about 20 countries. We did several stops in the UK, which were some of my favorite. And in essence, what I'm trying to lay out in that chapter is it's very hard for any of us to just map a future without some people who have done it before us. It's very hard for us to just say, well, this is what I want in life. I'm going to go get it. And no one else should have anything to do with that. And my relationship with Jordan in many ways was accidental. It's hard for people to remember, but Jordan wasn't always this worldwide phenomenon. And years ago, I mean, this was, I believe in 2016 when he started coming on the map. So this is the fall of 2016, if I'm not mistaken. I had him on the show, and it was before we had just moved into this house. I didn't have a studio yet. We did a Google Hangout. The internet connection was terrible, and I'm talking to him, and I didn't really know who he was other than Twitter. And I talked to him for about an hour, and I thought he was brilliant, and yet he was also crying while talking about Pinocchio. And I ended the interview, and I thought, wow, this guy is either the most brilliant thinker I have ever spoke to without question, or he's completely crazy. And then subsequently, over the next year, I fortunately became friends with him, and he, this is before we toured together, and I interviewed him many times in person, and we did public speaking together and the rest of it. And I saw a man take his life's work as a clinical psychologist and write this book, 12 Rules for Life, that then actually transformed the world. When I tell you that in every single country that we went to, every single stop, thousands of people were sitting in that crowd. And by the way, the mainstream media take on this was that it was angry white young men who show up to Jordan Peterson shows. And I assure you that was not the case. Now, by the way, if it was the case that it was all angry young men and he was helping them, well, then actually that would be a good thing. The media struggles with that concept, but it wasn't. I would say it was about 60-40 male to female, but there were gay people there. There were Muslims and Jews and blacks and whites. I mean, the whole thing, right? And what I saw this man do is, by his words, he changed people's lives. He got people to get in better relationships, to get off drugs, to end porn addictions, to reconnect with family members. I tell a couple stories about him in the book, but one I'll tell you very briefly. We were in Dublin, and when you end these theater shows, obviously as the performer, you can't walk out the front because most likely you're going to be mobbed by people. Yeah. So there's usually a little side exit. We exit the theater, and we had a very long day where he's doing a ton of press. He gives a different hour-and-a-half lecture every night. I mean, it was just incredible. He says hello. He stops to shake hands with every single person. I never saw him be rude to anyone, anything like that. We get into this alleyway, and there's these two guys standing about 20 feet away from us, and they start walking to us, and they're both crying. And one of them is probably about 60. The other one's probably about 25, something like that. And it turns out that they were a father and son who had lost touch about 5 years. They had a falling out about 5 years before. And by coincidence, they had both bought the book, started fixing their lives, showed up to the show and saw each other and reconnected.
Yeah.
And they stood there hugging each other, crying. Jordan began to tear up. I began to tear up. I thought this is incredible. This is so much bigger than just politics or just the culture war or anything else. So I would say, to answer your question about a mentor, through osmosis, I just got a lot of that messaging. It's not that Jordan sat me down like it was like a Jedi Knight and a Padawan learner. You know, it wasn't like we sat down like that. It was just being around this thing. I'm a better person. I'm not a perfect person, but I'm a better person.
Do you think, I mean, we're talking obviously about woke politics and identity politics, all these things that make people feel, as you put it in the book, you know, oh my God, you know, they're calling me a Nazi or whatever, and I'm not a Nazi. You know, do you think that, I know this is a question that's being asked a lot, Dave, but with this virus, you know, some people are saying, oh, well, that's it, it's gone. It's gone off the front page, it's gone off the media. Maybe we will go on now and realise that this was all a load of rubbish. Do you think that's going to happen or not?
Well, I think that would be wonderful, and I think it is happening.
I think it's kind of
we need it to happen.
Yeah,
right. We need it to happen. We all know it should happen, and I think what you're seeing right now, and this is why you're asking the question, is when something really bad happens, when we now have an unprecedented worldwide pandemic, when we are watching record levels of unemployment, we're watching quite literally people die, family members die. I think suddenly people are going, you know, all that stuff about gender pronouns and sexuality and all of these things, they don't matter. They actually don't matter. And I'm not saying that means suddenly you should be bigoted towards people. Of course not. But they've created a certain set of superfluous issues that in many ways just show how fabulously wonderful the West has done things. We've become so fat on our own success that we can suddenly debate whether the government should punish someone for misgendering somebody. And you guys, I've seen this, you know, I think it's from the Sussex police or something, where they suddenly put out these things that if someone offends you, you might want to report it to us. I mean, these are really dangerous ideas.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so we've seen plenty of that. So look, I think at the end of the day, when you're in a time of crisis right now, suddenly people are going, you know, whoever gives us the antidote to coronavirus, I don't care if it's a man or a woman or if they're black or white or gay or straight or the rest of it. If I'm getting on a plane, do I care what gender or sexuality or anything else that the person who's flying the plane, the pilot, is, other than that they are the best qualified person to fly the plane? If I'm having heart surgery tomorrow, do I want the best Asian doctor, white doctor, or black doctor, or I just want the best doctor? And I think we have to start framing it like that, because we all know it to be true. Yeah. If you had a medical problem tomorrow, and then they showed you a whole bunch of doctors, and they said, you know, these people all have different qualifications, but some of them, their immutable characteristics rank really high. And you're going, well, I just want the best doctor because I don't want to die on the table. You're most likely going to be colorblind. And that, by the way, is exactly what Martin Luther King Jr. wanted, right? What did he want for his children? He wanted them not to be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So I'm very hopeful that we will get past this. That being said, it's a virus. It's a virus of the mind, and it gets in the system, and it's very hard to eliminate. So I don't think it's gone, but I do think right now it's pretty neutered.
I think one difference maybe between America and in Britain is that we have hate speech laws, for example, which is part of this. Whereas, you know, you are to a great extent defended by the Constitution. I mean, you know, there is a big difference. We don't have that. So we have the whole new rafter of laws. Makes it very, very difficult. One thing I want to ask you about the book as well, Dave, which struck me, is that it's dedicated to Ben Affleck. And I know why, but I think maybe some people watching will not. Why, we're talking about the Hollywood actor Ben Affleck, why have you dedicated it to him?
Sure. So to be clear, I don't know Ben Affleck. I've never met Ben Affleck. I've seen a lot of Ben Affleck movies, but why did I dedicate the book to Ben Affleck? Well, there's a very famous moment that I think was the political awakening for many people, and really was a truly, truly seminal moment in my life and certainly in my career. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. Ben Affleck was a panelist on Real Time with Bill Maher. And when I say panelist, meaning he was one of the 3 people on the opposite side of the table where they, that's where they debate the hot topics of the day. And then usually what they do on Real Time is they bring on another guest who sits on the same side of the table as Bill Maher. And that person has sort of a protected interview, meaning it's really more of a one-on-one. On that night, a mild-mannered neuroscientist named Sam Harris, who I did not know of at the time, he sat down with Bill Maher, and they were there to discuss his book called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion, which I have right over there. And it's basically a book about how to find inner peace. And as they were discussing it, the topic of religion came up because Sam has been very outspoken. He's an outspoken critic of all religions, with bar none, with no exceptions. And obviously Bill Maher is a huge critic of religion. And what they started discussing was that we have to be able to separate ideas and people. Now, this is a concept that we all know, but we have trouble understanding in many cases. So ideas, meaning you should be able to criticize any set of ideas, but that doesn't mean you should be bigoted towards people who might hold those ideas. So in other words, you should be able to criticize the Old Testament and nobody would think you're automatically a hater of all Jews. You should be able to criticize the New Testament. Nobody would run around saying you hate all Christians. And likewise, you should be able to criticize the set of ideas that is the Quran, and you shouldn't hate all Muslim people as people. You would want to judge people individually. This is actually a very simple idea, but for some reason, it's very hard for people to understand. The way I would give you a metaphor to this is that religious doctrine is just a set of ideas, the same way a political party's doctrine is a set of ideas. So you could criticize everything in the Republican Party platform or the Labor Party platform. That doesn't mean you hate all members of the Labor Party. So this is a very important idea and an important distinction. And in effect, as they were talking about this relative to Islam, Ben Affleck turned to Bill Maher and Sam Harris, and the famous line is, he said that they are gross and racist. And he was also he was huffing and puffing and red in the face and kind of banging his hands on the table and very angry. And the reason that this was a wake-up moment for me was, at the time, I was still a big lefty. I was on the Young Turks network. But for about a year, I had been sort of trying to piece this thing together in my mind. And we all have some version of this where you know something's not right, but you can't quite piece it all together. And then something happens where you go, that's it. And this was the perfect example for me, because I had been thinking for about a year that it couldn't be that all of our intellectual opponents were racists and bigots and homophobes. It couldn't possibly be that we were so morally right and they were so morally wrong. It was just, the equation was just too easy. It just couldn't be. But I didn't have like the perfect example of what I was talking about. And then to watch this A-list actor just scream and emote, but in essence, what he was doing, what he was saying was not true. I mean, no one in their right mind, Bill Maher, I mean, this is a guy who for 30 years in America has been our most outspoken liberal, our most outspoken lefty. He has taken every lefty cause known to man. The idea that anyone would say Bill Maher is a racist is crazy. But what I saw happen right after that was suddenly all of the media was suddenly saying Bill Maher is a racist and Sam Harris is a racist, even though they said nothing racist. And by watching that, and by the way, as I said, I know that truly thousands and thousands, if not millions of people were woken up by that moment because it was just so obvious. So I thank Ben Affleck, actually, because if it wasn't for him doing that highly emotive, energetic, faux moralism, I don't know that I would have woken up as quickly as I did.
I mean, you've got this phenomenal following, obviously, Dave, but there you are in Los Angeles. You're in some ways the sort of capital of virtue signaling, isn't it? I mean, Ben Affleck's just one example, because that's what he was really doing, wasn't it, in that instance?
Yeah, it's virtue signaling.
I mean, is it tough? I mean, if you are not in that mainstream view. I mean, I lived there, as you know, for a while, and I think I met one Republican, and he was an agent. That was that's all I met in the whole time I was there.
It's an interesting question because, virtue signaling is an interesting thing because it's what you do outward. It isn't necessarily what you believe inwardly. And, Hollywood, for as messed up as Hollywood is and all the problems with Hollywood, the good thing about Hollywood is, the cream does tend to rise to the top. So if you have a good show, eventually it will break out. If you have a good stand-up routine, eventually it'll break out, whatever it might be. That's what competition's all about. So in many ways, even though these people pretend to be these crazy progressives, in another way, they live actually much more like libertarians. They want to be free. They want to make their money, spend it freely, and all of those things. I think that's actual virtue, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't think the faux moralization is virtue. But in terms of how it is living here, I mean, well, first off, I don't know if this is good for the country or the world, but we are watching politics and government collide into one thing. So I'm sorry, not politics and government, politics and entertainment collide into one thing. And as that happens, LA is the home of entertainment. So, suddenly Ben Shapiro, who we mentioned, he's here in LA. Dennis Prager here, and PragerU is in LA. Peter Thiel, the tech billionaire, he left San Francisco because he said, the progressive groupthink is so dangerous, and he fled to Los Angeles. I mean, that tells you that something decent must be happening here. Yes. But I would say the bigger barometer for me is that, when I walk my dog right now, and, it's really the only time that I get out of the house, the amount of people neighbors now who say hi to me and they'll say, oh, I saw you on Fox News last night, or, oh, I saw you on the Ben Shapiro show yesterday. And what they're really saying to me is, I'm one of you too.
Yeah.
It's like they wouldn't run around, they wouldn't plaster it anywhere, they wouldn't want it on Facebook. But I'm seeing more and more and more of that. So in that way, I am enthused. But to bring it around to where we started here about California in general, I mean, look, they are, as we speak, they are now making it illegal to close the beaches. So I am certainly not thrilled with my state at the moment.
No. Where do you think this is going to go, David? I mean, you've been hugely successful with your show, but obviously as the mainstream broadcast networks decline in influence, I mean, what do you see in 10 years' time? Do you think that there are just going to be many more shows like yours or like this one here, or what do you see the future for people who maybe want an alternative? Will it just be YouTube?
Well, I love this. Look exactly at what we're doing right now. We're trying to have an honest conversation with important questions, relevant issues, and the rest of it. If we were doing this on the BBC, or if we were doing this on CNN or anywhere else, they'd have 8 boxes with people who have never accomplished anything, or they worked for campaigns or something like that. And you wouldn't feel any better at the end. That's what I always tell people. When you watch CNN, do you feel better after? Do you actually feel more enlightened after? Now, I'm not saying every show that I've ever done is the most brilliant, enlightening thing ever, but I think for the most part, if you watch an hour-long interview that I do, you'll take something away from it. I know that every single interview I've done, I've taken something away. Sometimes, I take away some great ideas, but sometimes I go, wow, that person really didn't know what they were saying, and you can learn something through that. So as far as watching the sort of online media grow and the mainstream media crumble, I mean, I think in many ways the online media has already surpassed mainstream media. I probably on a per show basis get more views than primetime CNN, and not only that, I do it at a fraction of the cost. I would say what it costs to do one night of Anderson Cooper with all the studio lights and the staff and the whole thing is probably the whole year of my shows. I mean, we've figured out a way to make a sleek, nimble, profitable. We have no debt, nice small business, which is totally congruent with all of my sort of libertarian ideas. I pay my guys really well because they work hard for me. We gave my guys all bonuses in the midst of coronavirus because I want them to feel valued, and I want them to keep working hard and the rest of it. Right. But that's on me to do, not on the government to force me to pay them a certain amount or something like that. So I think we've already seen the online things surpass mainstream media. And in many ways, that's why mainstream media is so hysterical at the moment. They know they're a sinking ship. In many ways, I liken it, you lived in LA, to the La Brea tar pits where you can go here. And that's where, the dinosaurs would get caught in the tar. And some of the smarter dinosaurs, you know what they do? The smarter ones, instead of jumping right into the tar, they would sometimes jump on a dinosaur to get across the other way. And I think that's really sort of what's happening right now. That being said, I am worried because, look, we do this on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, and, big tech could in effect shut any of us down whenever they want. I have all sorts of issues with that. Yes, so we do have to be wary.
What have you had there? I mean, you've had some demonetization, things like that, or what? Or shadow banning?
Yeah, well, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, Twitter, in their terms of service, in effect has shadow banning. So shadow banning is when you follow somebody and you just don't see their tweets. They just don't appear in your feed. Now, in their terms of service, as of January 1st this year, at least from an American perspective, I actually think it might be different in the UK or in Europe. they're allowed to shadow ban. They can throttle certain accounts and promote certain accounts. Now, I'm not telling them as a business they can't do that, right? I mean, they can do what they want. But we should all be aware that as we tweet things out and as we put videos on Facebook and YouTube and the rest of it, we're all playing a fixed game and we're pretending that it's not fixed. It's like, if we were playing basketball or cricket and one team had one set of rules and the other team had another set of rules, but we all pretended it was the same rules, this would be a bit of a problem, right? So I'm worried that big tech could sort of take any of us out all the time. And by the way, because I try to do things and not just talk about them, this is why I started in the last year. I started my own tech company, locals.com, to build digital homes for creators where you can own your content. We don't own user data. It's a really beautiful system that I think we've solved 95% of the problems for 95% of the people. And if any of your viewers or listeners want to check it out, RubinReport.com is the first project of Locals. And we have a totally troll-free environment. There's no deplatforming on Locals, because if you come into my local and you're just there to wreak havoc, I can kick you out, but you can still be in anyone else's local. And by the way, that's not an infringement on free speech, because just like I'm for anyone saying whatever they want outside of my house, I don't welcome everybody into my house to say whatever they want. So I think we have to start dealing with these issues in a mature way. And I do see a new internet sort of on the horizon. Internet 3.0, I think, is what a lot of people are calling it. But I don't think people like us should pretend that our problems have been solved just because the mainstream media is kind of crumbling right now. I think we still have a lot of problems on the horizon.
Your company again is called locals.com, is that right?
So locals.com is the parent company, and our first product, in effect, if people want to see it, is RubinReport.com, and we build iOS apps and we build Android apps. And again, it's every creator sets your rules. It's your own rules. It's your community. It's sort of like building your own country. And if you want to associate with other people, you can. And if you don't, you won't. Yeah. And again, there's no perfect system. I think a lot of people are sort of looking like we can somehow build a social network that is an absolute perfect system for everybody. And I just don't think that exists. So I think by doing something that's creator first, that's the way to do it.
We're going to sort of finish shortly, Dave. Obviously, you've got other things you've got to go and do. I wanted to ask you, though, if your comments about the way things are going at the moment politically in your country. First of all, I wondered what, here, obviously the view we have of President Trump is very much through a filter of, a very hostile media. So what's new? But
we all saw the balloon.
Exactly. I just wondered what your view is of the way that he's handling the crisis at the moment, and also, for that matter, what do you see happening in November? I mean, because I saw a poll recently which showed Biden about 10 points ahead. Is that an outlier or is that actually happening?
Yeah. Well, first off, to the poll point, I mean, every single poll I think in America had Hillary Clinton winning. So I wouldn't get too hung up on polls, and I certainly wouldn't get too hung up on them, this many months out from the election. Very quickly on Biden. I mean, look, the sad thing with Biden, and I don't mean this to be glib or funny in any way. It's like the guy's having major cognitive problems. We all know it. We all can see it. He's having trouble finishing sentences. Many of us have dealt with this, all right? My grandmother, who passed away a few years ago, had dementia. I know what that's like. I'm not saying he has dementia, but there is something going on there. And the media is running cover for him, where it's what I described as fake news before, in that if you never talk about something that we can all see, it makes average people go, oh, what else are you lying to us about? So what I'm concerned about with Biden is that they're sort of covering him right now. And they're dragging him to get the nomination. But anyone that votes for Biden, the unfortunate truth is, what you really have to understand is you're most likely voting for the vice president. You are not voting for that person. And that's just a sad fact. It is not a reflection of how I feel about Biden or anything else. So that's Biden. As far as Trump, look, I think a lot of people wanted a panther in a china shop a couple of years ago. We wanted this panther to walk in and be kind of cool and calm, and with its tail to knock a piece of china off and then walk out the back door, close it, and let everything be. But there's no such thing as a panther in a china shop, right? You get a bull in a china shop. And that's what Trump is. He walked in, he kind of wrecked everything. and now things are sort of being rebuilt. So I did not vote for Trump last time. I voted for Gary Johnson, who was the third party libertarian candidate. And by the way, I'm in California, where I had the luxury of making a decision like that because it was going to go so heavily for Hillary no matter what. But I would say, short of absolute economic collapse, short of, you know, a true Great Depression kicking in, which, by the way, is not completely unfathomable. I mean, we have 25 million people unemployed right now. I mean, we have major problems. But short of that, I think Trump probably wins, and I think he probably wins pretty big. I think in effect, what's happened here is that the average person who's watching this, we're watching Democrat states like California do crazy lockdowns right now, and as opposed to just having honest conversations with us about how to reopen. And I can't say that I don't think any of that has to do with the fact that they want to hurt Trump. But meanwhile, Republican states like Texas are opening up, I think, today or tomorrow, and they'll figure out a way to do it. I think people want to go back to work. I think people want to get their lives back together, and I think that sort of becomes a win for Trump. I also think Trump was very hard on on China before this. I think that obviously becomes a win. Yeah. I think the Second Amendment stuff, the gun stuff, becomes more of a win for Trump because people are thinking, well, the whole system seems a little crazy. Maybe I should be able to defend myself. I think that becomes a win for him. I also think the border stuff, you know, where the Democrats are sort of more open border, or it's very unclear what they want. Trump does want a border. You may not like the wall. You may not like the way he talks about it, but I think that becomes a win too. So again, that's all sort of separate from his personality and the Twitter and everything else. But my sense is that short of something truly catastrophic, which, as I said, anything could happen at this point, I think Trump probably gets reelected.
So I think I take from that you've gone towards Trump yourself much more than maybe last time.
I don't think he's a racist. I don't think he's a homophobe. I think he fights the media in a way that is the only way that they can be fought. I'm not going to sit here and say I think he's the most moral, greatest person ever. Politics is a really, really dirty game. We all know politicians lie, and other politicians just do it while wearing a sharp suit and a really nice smile, and it, you know, that it seems they really love their wife. I probably don't have time for the whole story, but I will tell you one thing, which is there's a video on my channel where I talk about it. But I met Trump at Mar-a-Lago in December. I had dinner with Trump Jr. and Kimberly Guilfoyle, his girlfriend, and my husband and I. And Trump, Jr. introduced us to Trump. And when Trump realized that we were gay, he was thrilled. He slapped his hands on the table. He stood up. He said, "I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you for coming." And then he said something that I probably can't repeat because of language. But, you know, in effect, he said, I don't give a shit, and I don't think anyone else gives a shit, and I don't think they've given a shit for 20 years. And my husband had a nice chat with Melania. I had a nice chat with Trump. And, you know, again, I don't think he's perfect. I think the system is wacky, but we don't have great options right now. So, you know, it would be crazy for me to say, oh, well, I'm absolutely voting for him right now. It's like, I'll be happy to talk to you again in the fall, and we can discuss it as we get a little bit closer. But I don't have major problems with him in light of the way he's dealing with what I think are much bigger problems related to the media and the rest of the things that we've been talking about here.
Well, Dave, you mentioned your husband, by the way, there. Am I right in thinking you're sort of going for a family, aren't you, at the moment? Or is that right?
We just settled on our surrogate. It's a strange time to decide that you're going to expand your family in the middle of a pandemic. But yes, we are doing that.
Okay. Well, look, all the very best. Dave, I do want to thank you very much for your time this morning. It's about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, isn't it there, I think?
It's 8 a.m., but I had my coffee, and, you know, they always tell me there's this idea in America, oh, you have to watch out for these UK journalists because, you know, they're always trying to get you.
Oh, they are?
But I know that, and often they are, but I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much. And the book again is Don't Burn This Book by Dave Rubin. It's out now. It came out this week. Thank you very, very much, Dave. Thanks very much for watching, and we shall see you next time on So What You're Saying Is. Please do remember to subscribe, won't you? Thank you. Bye.